In today's video, I'm going to talk about simple techniques for complicated patterns and objects in your painting. Basically, I'm going to break down how I approach difficult subject matter. And I love talking about this because honestly, painting something really complicated and people sort of saying that they could never do that because it's so complicated is actually how I got into teaching. I had a series of greenhouse paintings that were large and complex and detailed. And enough people sort of were like, I could never do this, that I started posting slides. So carousel was a newer feature on Instagram. And I remember posting the initial drawing, the initial block in, all the messy middle stages, and then finally the finished painting. And I remember people saying, oh, it's like you break it down, you make it simple, it's step by step, that's how you do it. And these insights were really valuable for people wanting to learn how to paint. And as a teacher, it was really helpful for me because it kind of laid the groundwork for how I would forever approach teaching. And so as I teach, I always tell people it's less about simplifying your subject matter, although that can be a great step, especially if you've never painted, and more about simplifying your process. And what this often looks like is basically each step, you're only handling a couple of big concepts at a time. So painting, part of the challenge of painting representationally is that you're juggling a lot of big concepts. The big three I always tell my students is drawing, value, and color. And obviously those are big umbrella terms for a lot of different ideas. But admittedly, no matter how many years you've been painting, to try and do all three with a brush stroke is a really, really challenging act. That's why painting is so difficult, especially if you're trying to paint representationally. Which, to briefly clarify, representation just means it looks like something in real life. So I have my reference photo on here. You guys are always welcome to use it. Just try not to post the reference photo by itself online. And if you do paint this, tag me, mostly because I like to see them, but also credit is helpful. I'm a full-time living working artist, so it's always more helpful than you guys even know. Okay, but what I mean by breaking down complicated things into simple tasks is, right now you can see on camera, I'm taking alizarin crimson and I'm drawing on top of my painting. And if you've never seen this process before, it can look like I'm making the painting worse. And yeah, I mean, if we're thinking of forward is moving the painting towards a completed, perfect representational painting, and backwards is sort of making it look less realistic, less representational, then yes, then like I am making it look less realistic with these lines. But I'm gonna begin to go forward again in the next step and push it again in the right direction. I should also say that everything I've been doing up until this point has been acrylic, and now I'm switching over to oil paint. But part of why I do that drawing step separated is because then whenever I go in with my color, I'm only thinking of the color. So is this a red, an orange, a blue, and then the value, which is how light or how dark it is. And I'm only juggling sort of two concepts, and I can lean into those drawing lines that I already made to help guide me. So I'm juggling less. It's less that I'm sort of pushing myself as a painter to just be better, sort of white knuckling, so to speak. It's this idea of sort of just willing yourself to see things and like taking it really personally, which I think a lot of new painters tend to do. I understand this. I have a son who I'm teaching how to paint. I teach him how to do a lot of stuff. I'm a mom. And my job for him is to always steer him away from sort of over personalizing it and just sort of saying like, I'm not good, and rather focusing on strategies and skill sets. And I'm a big believer that all you really need to get better at something is patience and a plan. And I know that sounds like an easy, simple platitude, but I mean it truly. And as a teacher who teaches full time, my online art school, I talk about it a lot. I'm very proud of it. We just added fabric and pattern. So this is a very pertinent and topical painting that I'm making. But one thing I always pride myself in doing is, no matter how complicated and how ambitious the students are, can we take what their goal is and break it down into smaller, bite-sized plans and concepts and ideas. I like to think of the analogy of bowling and how when you're a little kid and you go bowling, you get something called bumper lanes. And the idea is that if every time you're swinging your bowling ball and you're hitting a gutter over and over and over, you get so discouraged that it prevents you from having, I think, the fortitude and importantly the patience to keep attempting doing something that you just keep like doing, terribly, to say the least. And so as an artist, and obviously as an art teacher, what can we set up to help you not put your ball in the gutter metaphorically, or make a painting where by the time you're done, you're so unhappy with it because it went so dramatically off the rails. An idea that I introduced and walked my students through in this most recent course was the concept of value bracketing. I'll share that here with you guys. And basically it's the idea that before you jump into a painting, you mark out the darkest value and lightest value, and you pre-mix that off to the side. And what you do is when you're in the weeds, when you're pushing, let's say, the shadow of the tea jug or the shadows in between the apricots, because our brain really struggles to see value, it's like just a shortcoming in our eyes. It's very normal, but it's something that artists know to sort of be aware of. If you've already pre-measured out the values and you know they're correct ahead of time before you're sort of in the weeds mixing the paint, it's easy for you to not punch holes in your painting and go super, super dark or super, super light, which seems like maybe that's not the biggest deal ever. But given that value underpins both color and form, form is basically like the drawing plus, the shadow, the light or the dark. It's what makes something look realistic and lifelike, and color is obviously color. But whenever you're off in your value, it throws both of those things completely off the rails. In fact, I always go as far as to say that a lot of times when my students are struggling with a painting, like more than half the time, it's the value is off. But by using pre-mixed values that you've double, triple checked that are correct at your darkest, lightest, and midpoint of your painting ahead of time, by value bracketing, by mixing ahead of time, you have created basically bumper lanes for yourself where your painting can't go off the rails to the point where it is so discouraging, which is where I would invite that concept of patience plus a plan in place. And a lot of this will refine and modify as you develop your painting practice. For me, value is something I always kind of have to watch, which is why I bring it up so often. But even let's just take drawing aside, it might be something where you grid out your paintings before you get the hang of like freehanding. I freehand all my paintings. It's sort of the fruit of like 15 years of having a pretty consistent practice, is I'm pretty good at freehanding. But if with my students, it's no big deal to sort of have them develop strategies and plans. And again, if we're using that analogy, bumper lanes, whether that's gridding, using a projector, using a paint transfer, all of these things I sort of share with my students as valuable resources that you can use to help you devise a plan as you put in the work, as you're patient, as you show up consistently. And eventually you can either choose that as like a tool that you use and it's no big deal. I know plenty of valid, amazing artists who just use projectors as part of their process. Or it can help you stay on track, stay motivated, can help you with a plan, and then eventually you can outgrow it if you see value in that, which is sort of the other thing that I really emphasize as a teacher, which is that tools are neutral. If you use a projector, if you use value bracketing, whatever it is, sometimes in our world we sort of see one thing as more valuable than the other. Like one is sort of a technique used by the old masters, so it's great, but another is a aspect of modern technology, so it's less helpful, and so I sort of show all of those things, and you can sort of decide on your own, like, is that a skill that you want to sort of do all the drills that you learn in art school to get better at, or can you use that tool and that technique to help you get through it and maybe decide later? I think such a big part of learning to paint is staying motivated. It's something that a lot of sort of macho art school people who think that the best way to be a good artist is sort of blood, sweat, and tears will deprioritize. And something that as a teacher I think is really important is working with your own motivation, especially if if you're neurodivergent in some way and you really need that dopamine to keep you going. I think it is absolutely worth investigating and developing ways to keep yourself motivated and sort of addressing that might be an aspect of your learning and you're developing as a painter. Another incredibly important aspect to this, to developing plans and simplifying, is a concept that I also teach in this newest course, which is general to specific. This is actually a concept that sort of underpins all of my lessons. I think I'm up to like 16 lessons for Not Sorry Art School. But it's the idea that you start really, really simple and you work your way up. And this can be in multiple different ways. One, you can start with simple compositions and work up, obviously, but also in the fact that in the beginning of the painting, we work with bigger brushes. We don't even think about detail. We sort of force ourselves to look at the big shapes and forms. and then we push as we develop through the painting. I hope you guys enjoy watching that come together. As always, I would invite you to check out Not Sorry Art School. I'm really proud of this new lesson. I've seen so much transformation in my students even so far. As always, like and subscribe and stick around for next week's new video. I'll talk to you guys later.